A baby gets lost in the forest, and everyone fears the worst, until an abandoned dog does the impossible and saves his life. This dog's heroic act left the whole town in shock. Want to know how he did it? Find out now. The sun hung high in the cloudless sky over Maplewood, casting a warm glow on the picturesque streets lined with maple trees. It was a Thursday afternoon in October, and the small town vibrated with the gentle rhythm of everyday life. On Elm Street, a young mother named Olivia was playing with her 18-month-old son, Lucas, in the front yard. Olivia watched with delight as Lucas walked across the grass, his chubby legs carrying him with determination. His laughter, a melody of pure joy, filled the air as he chased after a bright yellow ball. The peaceful scene was a testament to the idyllic life that Maplewood offered its residents. As Lucas played, Olivia's attention was momentarily drawn to her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who was tending to her precious rose bushes. "Those roses look lovely, Mrs. Henderson," Olivia called out, waving to the older woman. Mrs. Henderson straightened up, a proud smile on her face. "Thank you so much, dear. It's been a good year for them. How's little Lucas doing?" Olivia turned to look at her son, her heart full of love. "He's growing up so fast. I can hardly keep up with him these days." As the two women talked, neither noticed the colorful butterfly that had caught Lucas' eye. The baby's eyes widened in admiration as he watched the delicate creature fly past him, its wings a kaleidoscope of blues and purples. Without a second thought, Lucas began to follow the butterfly, his curiosity overriding any sense of caution. The butterfly danced through the air, taking Lucas further and further away from the safety of his backyard. Before long, the child had crossed the street and was approaching the edge of Maplewood Forest, a dense woodland that bordered the east side of the city. It was only when Mrs. Henderson gave a startled gasp that Olivia realized something was wrong. She turned around, her eyes searching frantically for Lucas. "Lucas!" she shouted, her voice tinged with growing panic. "Lucas, where are you?" The yellow ball lay abandoned on the grass, a clear reminder of where her son had been moments ago. Olivia's heart raced as she scanned the street, her eyes finally landing on a small figure disappearing into the trees of Maplewood Forest. "Lucas!" Olivia shouted, her feet already carrying her across the yard towards the forest. Mrs. Henderson, realizing the urgency of the situation, rushed to the phone to call for help. When Olivia reached the edge of the forest, she could no longer see any sign of Lucas. The dense foliage seemed to have swallowed him whole. She plunged into the forest, the branches hitting her face and arms as she advanced through the undergrowth. "Lucas!" she shouted again and again, her voice becoming hoarse with despair. The forest seemed to absorb her cries, the thick canopy muffling her voice. Tears streamed down her face as she staggered through the forest, her mind racing with terrifying possibilities. Back in town, news of Lucas' disappearance spread quickly. Neighbors came out of their houses, with worry on their faces. The quiet afternoon had turned into a nightmare, and, as the reality of the situation set in, a sense of urgency gripped the community. In the midst of the growing chaos, a scruffy dog called Max watched from the shadows of an alleyway. Ignored and often shunned by the townspeople, Max had learned to keep his distance. But as he watched the panic unfold before him, something stirred in his chest, a long-buried instinct to protect and serve. As sirens began to sound in the distance and more people took to the streets, Max made a decision. With a determined glint in his eyes, he turned and trotted towards the forest, his nose already working to pick up the scent of the missing child. Unbeknownst to the frantic residents of Maplewood, their unlikely hero was about to embark on a journey that would change everything. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over Maplewood, the quiet town was transformed into a hive of frenetic activity. The news of Lucas' disappearance spread like wildfire, igniting a sense of urgency in the hearts of every resident. Olivia emerged from the forest, her clothes in disarray and her face covered in tears. Her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, rushed to her side, putting a comforting arm around her shoulders. "We've called the police, dear," she said softly. "They're on their way." Within minutes, the sound of sirens echoed in the air as police cars and a fire truck arrived on the scene. Officer Daniel Roberts, an experienced member of the Maplewood Police Department, took control of the situation. His calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the panic gripping the neighborhood. "Ma'am, can you tell me exactly what happened?" Constable Roberts asked Olivia gently. Through her sobs, Olivia recounted the events leading up to Lucas's disappearance. As she spoke, more and more neighbors gathered around, their faces marked by concern and determination. "We need to organize a search party," declared Mr. Johnson, owner of the local hardware store. "This forest is no place for a small child." Constable Roberts nodded in agreement. "It's a good idea, but we need to be systematic about it. We don't want anyone else to get lost out there." As the police began to coordinate the search efforts, the Maplewood community sprang into action. The local diner, run by the gregarious Mrs. Patel, became the makeshift headquarters for the search operation. People came and went, carrying flashlights, bottles of water, and maps of the forest. Amid the chaos, old rivalries and petty disagreements that once divided the town seemed to have dissipated. Tom Wilson and Frank Cooper, who hadn't spoken for years due to a property dispute, now stood side by side, examining a map of the forest. "I know these trails like the back of my hand," said Tom, his finger tracing a path on the map. "If we split up into groups, we can cover more ground." Frank nodded, adding, "And I've got some high-powered flashlights in my truck. They'll help us see better in the dense areas." As the search party prepared to leave, Olivia stood in the center of the cafeteria, red-eyed but full of determination. "Thank you all," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't tell you how much your help means to me." Mrs. Patel approached her, placing a thermos of hot coffee in her hands. "We take care of our own here in Maplewood," she said firmly. "We'll find your son." As dusk fell, the search party set off into the forest, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was charged with tension and hope as they called out Lucas' name, their voices echoing among the trees. Unknown to the searchers, a different kind of rescue mission was already underway. Max, the scruffy stray dog, had picked up Lucas' scent and was following him deeper into the forest. His keen nose led him through thickets and fallen logs, his determination unwavering. As the night wore on, the community's determination only grew. In the houses of Maplewood, those who were unable to take part in the search remained vigilant, their porch lights burning like beacons of hope. Prayer circles formed in living rooms, and social media buzzed with updates and words of encouragement. Back in the forest, Constable Roberts coordinated the search teams via radio, ensuring that no area went unchecked. But as the hours passed without any sign of Lucas, a sense of dread began to set in. Olivia, who had insisted on joining one of the search teams, fought against exhaustion, her mother's instinct driving her on. "We'll find him," she whispered to herself, a mantra of hope in the face of mounting fear. "We have to find him." As the first light of dawn began to break over Maplewood, the town remained united in its mission. The search for little Lucas had become more than just a rescue operation. It had become a testament to the strength and spirit of a community that pulls together in times of crisis. As the first rays of dawn broke through the canopy of Maplewood Forest, Max, the stray and ragged dog, put his nose to the damp earth. The scent of the missing child, Lucas, was faint, but still detectable. Max's keen senses, honed by years of survival on the streets, guided him deeper into the forest. The sounds of the search team echoed in the distance, but Max paid them no heed. He had a mission that awakened something deep inside him, a sense of purpose long forgotten. As he navigated through the undergrowth, Max's mind drifted back to a time when he had a home, a family. The memories were hazy, like a half-remembered dream, but the emotions they evoked were still raw. He remembered the warmth of a child's embrace, the comfort of a soft bed, the security of regular meals. But these memories were tarnished by the day everything changed. The car journey that ended with him being left alone in an unfamiliar place, confused and scared. Max shook his head, as if trying to rid himself of the painful memories. He had learned to survive on his own, foraging for food in the alleys and seeking shelter wherever he could. The people of Maplewood ignored him. Some even drove him away with harsh words and threatening gestures. But now, following Lucas' scent, Max felt a renewed determination. He may have been abandoned, but he wouldn't let the same fate befall this child. The forest became denser as Max ventured further into it. Thorny vines snagged his matted fur and fallen branches crackled under his paws. Nevertheless, he kept going, his nose guiding the way. As the morning wore on, the sounds of the search party grew fainter. Max was venturing into parts of the forest that humans rarely explored. The terrain became more treacherous, with steep slopes and hidden holes. At one point, Max's paw slipped on some loose gravel, causing him to fall into a small ravine. He screamed in pain as he landed hard on the bottom, with a sharp stone cutting into his side. For a moment, Max lay there, panting heavily. The pain in his side throbbed and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. It would have been so easy to give up, turn back and leave the humans to their search. But then, carried by the breeze, there came a sound that made Max's ears perk up, a faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakably human moan. It was Lucas. With renewed energy, Max stood up with difficulty. He ignored the pain in his side and the tiredness in his bones. The child needed him, and he wouldn't let Lucas down. As Max climbed out of the ravine, his determination stronger than ever, the forest around him seemed to change. The obstacles that had stopped him now seemed less daunting. It was as if nature itself was recognizing his noble purpose. Meanwhile, back in Maplewood, the search efforts continued with increasing desperation. Olivia, Lucas' mother, was barely sleeping, her eyes red and her voice hoarse from calling her son's name. The community rallied around her, supporting her in every way possible. Mrs. Patel from the cafeteria kept a constant supply of coffee and sandwiches for the researchers. Mr. Johnson from the hardware store donated additional flashlights and batteries. As the morning progressed, tensions began to rise. Exhaustion and fear led to an explosive temper and blame. Some questioned why Olivia had lost sight of Lucas, while others argued about the best search strategies. Officer Roberts worked tirelessly to maintain peace and focus on the mission at hand. "We're all here for one reason," he reminded the group, "to bring Lucas home safely. Let's not lose sight of that." His words seemed to have an effect, as the community once again united in their common goal. They may have been tired, scared, and frustrated, but they were determined not to give up. As the search party regrouped and planned their next move, none of them knew that the best hope of finding Lucas was making its way into the heart of Maplewood Forest. Max, the previously ignored stray dog, was about to become an unlikely hero. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting shadows on the forest canopy, felt her hope dwindle. She had been searching for Lucas for what seemed like an eternity, her voice hoarse from calling his name, and her body sore from struggling through the dense undergrowth. Constable Robert on his face. "Ma'am, I think it's time you took a break, or—" "You've been doing this all night." Olivia shook her head vehemently, her eyes watering with despair. "I can't stop. He's out there, alone and scared. I have to find him." The policeman put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I understand. But you won't help Lucas at all if you collapse from exhaustion. Let's go back to the command post, get you some food and water, and then we'll continue the search." Reluctantly, Olivia let herself be led back to the makeshift command center at the edge of the forest. When they emerged from the trees, she was struck by the sight before her. The once quiet street was now a hive of activity. Volunteers were bustling around, coordinating search efforts, distributing supplies and offering words of encouragement to each other. Mrs. Patel from the cafeteria came running, placing a steaming cup of coffee in Olivia's hands. "Here, dear, you need to keep your strength up." Olivia took a sip, the warmth of the coffee contrasting with the cold dread that had settled in her stomach. As she looked around at the faces of her neighbors, some familiar, some strangers, she was overwhelmed by the show of support. "I can't thank you all enough," she stammered, with tears in her eyes. Mr. Johnson, the owner of the hardware store, stepped forward. "No need to thank me. That's the way the community is. We take care of our own." As Olivia sat down on a nearby bench, her mind flashed back to when she had last seen Lucas. His bright smile, his chubby little hands reaching for the butterfly. How could she have been so careless? Guilt threatened to consume her. "It's not your fault," said a soft voice beside her. Olivia looked up and saw Mrs. Henderson, her elderly neighbor. "Children are quick and accidents happen. We'll find him." Olivia nodded, unable to speak beyond the lump in her throat. She closed her eyes, trying to push away the terrifying images that tormented her. Lucas hurt, alone, or worse. Suddenly, a commotion at the edge of the forest caught everyone's attention. A search party had returned, their faces grim. "We found this," said one of the volunteers, holding up a small shoe stained with mud. Lucas' shoe. Olivia's world tilted. She stumbled to her feet, picking up the tiny sneaker with trembling hands. As her fingers closed around it, a sob burst from her throat. It was real, tangible evidence of her son's presence in the vast, unforgiving forest. Constable Roberts quickly took control of the situation. "That's good news," he said firmly. "It gives us a direction to focus our search. We're getting closer." As the search teams regrouped and prepared to head back into the forest with renewed determination, Olivia clutched her shoe against her chest. It was a lifeline, a connection to her son. "Hang in there, Lucas," she whispered. "Mommy's coming, just hang in there." Unbeknownst to Olivia and the search party, deep in the forest, Max was getting closer and closer to the lost child. The stray dog's determination matched that of the humans searching for Lucas, his instincts guiding him through the woods with unwavering focus. As the day wore on, the fates of a mother, a child, and a forgotten dog continued to intertwine, weaving a story of hope, perseverance, and the unbreakable bonds of love that can form in the most unexpected circumstances. As the afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of the Maplewood forest, Max moved on, his paws sore from the kilometers he had covered. The mongrel's scruffy fur, once matted, was now covered in mud and leaves, evidence of his arduous journey through nature. Despite his exhaustion, Max's determination never waned. The faint scent of Lucas carried him forward, a beacon of hope in the vast expanse of green. Max stopped in a small clearing, and his keen ears picked up the sound of running water. Guided by his survival instincts, he headed towards the noise, arriving at a bubbling stream. The cool, clear water was a welcome sight, and Max drank it greedily, quenching his thirst and renewing his energy. As he drank, Max's mind turned to memories of his past life. He remembered a time when he had a home, a family who loved him. The feeling of a child's arms around his neck, the warmth of a cozy bed, the security of regular meals. All these memories came back, bittersweet and poignant, but those happy times had ended abruptly. Max remembered the confusing car journey, the unfamiliar surroundings, and the crushing realization that he had been abandoned. Since then, he had learned to survive on his own, foraging for food in the alleys and seeking shelter wherever he could. The streets of Maplewood had been his home, but never a truly welcoming one. Shaking off the water and the weight of his memories, Max refocused on his mission. The smell of Lucas was getting stronger, spurring him on with renewed vigor. He advanced through the dense undergrowth, ignoring the thorns that scratched his sides. Suddenly, a new smell caught his attention, something wild and dangerous. Max shivered as he recognized the scent of a predator. His protective instincts kicked in, knowing that whatever was lurking in the forest could pose a threat to the lost child. With cautious steps, Max continued forward, his senses on high alert. The forest seemed to grow quieter, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. In the distance, Max could hear the faint cry of a child. Lucas was close, but so was the danger. Meanwhile, at the edge of the forest, the search party was regrouping. Olivia, holding Lucas' small shoe, stood next to Constable Roberts as he addressed the volunteers. "We have a lead now," said the policeman, his voice firm and reassuring. "We're going to concentrate our efforts on the area where the shoe was found. Remember, stay in your assigned groups and keep in touch by radio at all times." As the teams prepared to return to the forest, Olivia felt a wave of hope mixed with fear. The shoe was proof that Lucas had made it this far, but it also highlighted the dangers he faced alone in the wild. Mrs. Patel approached Olivia, placing a sandwich in her hands. "You need to eat, dear," she said gently. "Keep your strength up for when we find him." Olivia nodded, taking a small bite, even though her stomach was in tatters. She looked around at the faces of her neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had come from neighboring towns to help. Their unwavering support touched her deeply, a reminder of the inherent goodness of people. As the search teams disappeared into the forest, Olivia closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. "Please," she begged whoever was listening, "keep my baby safe, guide us to him." Little did she know that her prayer was being answered in the most unexpected way. Deep in Maplewood Forest, a once-forgotten stray dog was about to become the unlikeliest of heroes, driven by the instinct to protect and the desire to belong. As the day wore on, the paths of a desperate mother, a lost child, and a determined dog drew ever closer, weaving together a story of hope, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of love that can form in the most challenging of circumstances. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows across Maplewood Forest, the search for little Lucas took on a renewed sense of urgency. The discovery of his shoe injected a new dose of hope into the exhausted searchers, but also highlighted the dangerous situation the child faced alone in the woods. Olivia, her face marked by worry and fatigue, struggled to keep going. She had joined one of the search teams, refusing to stand by while the others looked for her son. Every rustle in the bushes, every twig snapping, made her heart leap with hope and fear. "Lucas!" she shouted, her voice hoarse from hours of screaming. "Baby, can you hear Mommy?" Constable Roberts, who had insisted on accompanying Olivia's group, put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're getting closer," he assured her. "Every step we take is a step towards finding him." As they advanced, the forest seemed to get denser, the terrain more challenging. The team carefully navigated over fallen logs and around thorny bushes, their eyes constantly on the lookout for any sign of the missing child. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Max had picked up a stronger scent trail. The stray dog's ears perked up when he detected a faint sound in the distance, the cry of a child. With renewed energy, he lunged forward, his paws barely touching the ground as he ran towards the source of the noise. As Max got closer, he noticed another presence in the forest. The musky scent of a predator hung in the air, making him nervous. His protective instincts kicked in, knowing that whatever was lurking in that forest could pose a serious threat to Lucas. Back with the search party, Olivia suddenly stopped in her tracks. A shiver ran down her spine as an ominous howl echoed through the trees. Constable Roberts immediately picked up his radio. "All units, stand by. We have possible wildlife activity in the area. Proceed with caution." The tension in the group was palpable as they realized the additional danger Lucas faced. Olivia's mind was filled with terrifying possibilities, but she forced herself to stay focused on the task at hand. As the search team carefully made their way through a particularly dense patch of undergrowth, a flash of color caught Olivia's eye. Her heart almost stopped when she saw a small piece of fabric stuck in a thorny bush, a piece that matched the t-shirt Lucas was wearing. "Here," she shouted, her voice laced with emotion. "I've found something." The team converged on the scene, carefully examining the area for more clues. Constable Roberts radioed their position, asking for additional resources to be redirected to the scene. "That's good," he said, his voice firm and reassuring. "We're on the right track. Lucas shouldn't be far now." Group, they were oblivious that was unfolding just beyond their reach. Max finally located Lucas curled up in a small hole under a fallen tree. The baby was dirty, scared and hungry, but miraculously unharmed. Max's relief was short-lived, however. The predator he had sensed earlier, a hungry coyote, closing in on Lucas' location. The stray dog knew he was all that stood between the frightened child and potential danger. With a low growl, Max positioned himself protectively in front of Lucas. The coyote stepped out of the shadows, its eyes fixed on the vulnerable baby. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as the two animals faced each other, neither willing to back down. When the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting an orange glow through the trees, the forest held its breath. The fate of a lost child, a desperate mother, and an unlikely canine hero was at stake. Their stories intertwined in a way they hadn't yet realized. At that moment, deep in the heart of Maplewood Forest, the courage, love, and unbreakable spirit of a once-forgotten lost dog were about to be put to the test. As dusk descended on Maplewood Forest, casting long shadows and painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, Olivia felt a sudden and inexplicable surge of energy. Despite hours of searching, her maternal instinct told her that Lucas was close. She quickened her pace, her eyes scanning the darkening forest with renewed intensity. Officer Roberts noticed the change in her demeanor. "What's wrong?" he asked, keeping pace with her. "I don't know," Olivia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I can feel him. He's close." The search party, encouraged by Olivia's certainty, pressed on with renewed vigor. They navigated through particularly dense undergrowth, the branches scratching their arms and faces. Suddenly, A sound pierced the air, a high-pitched bark followed by a child's cry. Olivia's heart leapt into her throat. "Lucas!" she shouted, forgetting all caution as she took off running. Constable Roberts followed her. "Wait! It could be dangerous!" But his words fell on deaf ears as Olivia ran through the bushes, driven by a mother's desperate love. When she entered a small clearing, the scene before her made her blood run cold. There, huddled under a fallen tree, was Lucas, his little face covered in dirt and tears. But between her and her son was a ragged, battle-worn dog, its fur bristling as it faced a snarling coyote. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Olivia's eyes met those of the stray dog, and in that instant she saw the fierce determination and protective instinct burning in his gaze. This unlikely guardian was looking after her son. The coyote, sensing the arrival of the humans, hesitated. Max, seizing the opportunity, let out a series of sharp, aggressive barks, positioning himself more firmly between Lucas and the threat. Officer Roberts and the rest of the search team arrived, and their presence finally caused the coyote to retreat into the shadows of the forest. As soon as the danger passed, Olivia rushed forward, taking Lucas in her arms. "Oh, my baby," she sobbed, hugging him. "You're safe now, Mommy's here." Lucas clung to her, his little body trembling. "Doggy," he whimpered, pointing at Max. "Doggy, save me." Olivia turned her attention to the stray animal, who was now sitting wearily on the edge of the clearing, watching the gathering with tired eyes. She approached him slowly, with Lucas still in her arms. "Thank you," she said softly, reaching out to pat Max gently on the head. "You protected my son." Max leaned into her touch, his tail swaying slightly. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging, of purpose. Constable Roberts approached, his radio playing the excited voices of the other search teams. "We found him," he reported. "The child is safe and we're leaving now." As they prepared to leave the forest, Olivia made a decision. She turned to the policeman and said, "That dog, he saved Lucas. We can't leave him here." Roberts nodded in understanding. "We'll make sure he's looked after," he assured her. As they left the forest, Olivia carrying Lucas and Max limping beside them, the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. The nightmare was over, but for Olivia, Lucas and a previously forgotten stray animal, a new chapter was just beginning. The forest, which had seemed so vast and threatening, now seemed almost protective as it guided them home. And when they stepped out of the tree line, the cheers and shouts of joy from the waiting community enveloped them like a warm hug. In that moment, surrounded by the love of her neighbors and with her son safe in her arms, Olivia knew that this ordeal had changed them all. And as she looked at Max, his loyal eyes meeting hers, she silently vowed that he would never be alone again. When Olivia emerged from the forest with Lucas in her arms and Max limping faithfully at her side, the scene that greeted them was nothing short of extraordinary. The entire town of Maplewood seemed to have gathered at the edge of the forest, their faces a mixture of relief, joy, and admiration. The crowd cheered, flooding Olivia like a wave of pure emotion. Tears streamed down her face as she hugged Lucas tighter, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support from her community. Constable Roberts stepped forward, addressing the crowd. "Everyone, I'm pleased to report that Lucas has been found safe and sound, and we have an unlikely hero to thank for that." He gestured towards Max, who sat wearily at Olivia's feet. As if on cue, the exhausted puppy let out a soft whimper, drawing the attention of the onlookers. Murmurs of surprise and admiration spread through the crowd at the sight of the scruffy dog who had played such a crucial role in Lucas's rescue. Mrs. Patel, from the snack bar, was the first to approach, her eyes brimming with tears. "Oh, you beautiful, brave creature," she said, kneeling down to give Max a gentle pat on the head. The dog leaned into her touch, his tail wagging weakly. Then Mr. Johnson, from the hardware store, stepped forward, his gruff appearance softened by the emotion of the moment. "That dog has more heart than most people I know," he declared, his voice filled with admiration. As the crowd surged forward, eager to welcome Lucas home and praise their canine savior, Olivia felt a wave of protection. She could see the exhaustion in Max's eyes, the way he leaned heavily on his injured paw. "Please," she pleaded, her voice hoarse but firm. He needs rest and medical attention. Can someone call a vet? Dr. Anderson, the town veterinarian, stepped through the crowd. I'm already here, she said, kneeling down beside Max to examine him. Let's give this hero some well-deserved care. While Dr. Anderson tended to Max's wounds, Olivia finally allowed herself to relax. She sank to the floor, holding Lucas in her lap, running her fingers through his hair as if to reassure herself that he was really there. Mrs. Henderson, her elderly neighbor, appeared with a blanket and placed it gently on Olivia's shoulders. You both need to rest, dear, she said softly. Why don't you come to my house? It's closer than yours and I have plenty of room. Olivia nodded gratefully, too exhausted to speak. Getting up, she looked at Max, not wanting to leave him behind. Dr. Anderson, sensing her concern, smiled reassuringly. Don't worry, she said. I'll bring him to you as soon as I've cured him. He's part of your family now, isn't he? The words touched Olivia's heart. Family. Yes, that was exactly what Max had become in the course of this harrowing adventure. As the crowd began to disperse, mission accomplished. Olivia made her way to Mrs. Henderson's house, with Lucas dozing in her arms. The events of the previous day rattled through her mind. The terror, the despair, the unexpected miracle of Max's intervention. She knew that life would never be the same after that. The bonds forged in the crisis, between her and her community, between Lucas and his canine protector, were unbreakable. As she settled into Mrs. Henderson's spare room, with Lucas snuggled up to her, Olivia's thoughts turned to Max. She silently vowed to give him the home and love he deserved, to ensure that he would never be forgotten or neglected again. In the dead of night, as Maplewood settled into an exhausted but relieved sleep, a new day dawned, not just for Olivia and Lucas, but for a once-lost dog who had found his place in the world. The morning sun appeared through the curtains of Mrs. Henderson's guest room, casting a warm glow over Olivia and Lucas, still cuddled together in peaceful slumber. As Olivia stirred, the events of the previous day came flooding back, and she instinctively squeezed her son's arm. A soft knock on the door woke her fully. Mrs. Henderson entered, carrying a breakfast tray and a kind smile. Good morning, dear. How are you two feeling? Olivia sat down, careful not to wake Lucas. Better, thank you. I can't express enough how grateful I am for everything. As they spoke quietly, another knock came from the front door. Mrs. Henderson excused herself, returning moments later with Dr. Anderson and a familiar furry face. Look who's here, announced Dr. Anderson softly, as Max entered the room, his tail wagging shyly. Olivia's face lit up at the sight of the dog. Max! Oh, you wonderful boy! She patted the bed, inviting him to climb on. Max hesitated for a moment before carefully climbing onto the mattress, oblivious to his bandaged paw. The movement woke Lucas, who blinked sleepily before opening a wide smile. Puppy! He exclaimed, putting his arms around Max's neck. The dog responded with soft licks, his whole body relaxing as if he finally understood that he really was safe and loved. Dr. Anderson watched the scene with a smile. He'll be fine. A little rest, good food and lots of love will get him back to full strength in no time. As Olivia thanked the vet profusely, Mrs. Henderson joined the conversation. The whole town is asking about you three. There's a big crowd gathered at the diner. They're calling it a hero's welcome for Max. Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. The outpouring of support from her community was overwhelming. I don't know what to say, she muttered. You don't have to say anything, Mrs. Henderson assured her. Just being there is enough. This whole ordeal has brought out the best in Maplewood. People who haven't spoken to each other for years are now working together, planning this celebration. After a hearty breakfast and freshening up, Olivia, Lucas, and Max headed for the cafeteria. As they approached, they could hear the buzz of excited voices and see the colorful banners hanging from the entrance. The bell above the door rang as they entered, and a hush fell over the crowded cafeteria. For a moment, everyone simply stared, absorbing the sight of the reunited family and their canine hero. Then, as if a dam had broken, the room erupted in applause and cheers. Mrs. Patel rushed forward, enveloping Olivia in a warm hug before kneeling down to greet Lucas and Max. "Oh, you beautiful, brave souls," she said, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Mr. Johnson approached next, his rough exterior softened by emotion. We all helped, he announced. We got Max a new collar, some fancy dog food, and we even set up a fund for his medical care. Olivia felt tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you all, she began, but Mr. Johnson interrupted her with a gentle nod. There's no need to thank you. That's what community is all about. We look after our own, and Max here, he's one of us now. It was a new beginning. For her, for Lucas, for Max, and for the whole town of Maplewood. The bonds forged in the crisis transformed them all, reminding them of the power of compassion, the strength of community, and the unexpected ways in which heroes can emerge. As fall painted Maplewood in vibrant shades of red and gold, the town gathered for its annual Harvest Festival. The air was crisp and lively, with the scent of apple cider and pumpkin pie. For Olivia, Lucas, and Max, this day had a special meaning. It marked 6 months since the fateful incident that had changed their lives forever. The town square buzzed with activity as vendors set up stalls and children ran around, their laughter echoing through the air. At the center of it all was a brand new statue, a bronze figure of a shabby dog protecting a small child. The plaque below it read, "In honor of Max, Maplewood's unexpected hero." Olivia watched as Lucas, now a little taller and more talkative, led Max around the festival grounds. The once lost dog, now sporting a shiny collar and a well-groomed coat, trotted happily alongside his young companion. The bond between them had only strengthened over the months, with Max becoming an inseparable part of the family. As they approached Mrs. Patel's booth, the kindly diner owner smiled at them. "Here's my favorite trio," she exclaimed, offering Lucas a freshly baked cookie, and for Max a special treat. She showed him a homemade dog cookie, which Max accepted with a slight wag of his tail. Mr. Johnson approached, his rough exterior softened by a rare smile. "How's our town hero?" he asked, patting Max on the head. "I see you're still keeping an eye on that little rascal." Olivia nodded, her heart full. "We couldn't imagine life without him now. He's brought so much joy and love into our home." As they talked, Constable Roberts approached, his face serious but kind. "Olivia, there's someone here who would like to talk to you," he said, pointing to a nervous-looking woman standing a few meters away. Olivia held her breath as she recognized the woman. It was the person who had abandoned Max all those years ago. For a moment, tension hung in the air like a thick fog. The woman stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears. I saw the story on the news," she began hesitantly. "I never imagined. I'm sorry for what I did." Max, sensing the change in her mood, moved closer to Olivia. She put her hand on his head, strengthened by his presence. "I understand that what you did came from a place of desperation," Olivia said softly. "But Max has found his true home now. He's family." The woman nodded, with a mixture of regret and relief on her face. "I can see that. I'm glad he's found someone who loves him like he deserves." As the woman turned to leave, Olivia called out, "Wait!" She paused, carefully considering her next words. "There are so many other animals out there who need a home. Maybe you could volunteer at the shelter, turn it into something positive." A glimmer of hope shone in the woman's eyes. "I'd love to," she said softly. "Thank you." When the meeting was over, Olivia felt a weight come off her shoulders. She looked at Max, who stared at her with unwavering loyalty. At that moment, she realized that forgiveness and second chances weren't just for humans. They extended to all living beings. The festival continued around them, a testament to the resilience and unity of their small town. Children laughed as they picked apples, couples strolled hand in hand, and neighbors chatted over steaming cups of cider. The sense of community that had blossomed after Lucas' rescue only grew stronger with time. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over Maplewood, Olivia gathered Lucas and Max together. She looked at the town she now saw with new eyes, a place of kindness, forgiveness, and unexpected heroes. "Come on, you two," she said warmly. "Let's go home." And as they walked away from the festival, Max trotting happily between them, Olivia knew that home was more than just a place. It was the love they shared, the bonds they had created, and the community that had welcomed them. In Maplewood, They had found not just a happy ending, but a beautiful fresh start.